thank Information Technology Association of Canada. From this point forward, I will refer to them as ITAC, for hosting this webinar and sharing the information about their Career Ready program. So today I'm going to be your CEWIL host and moderator. I'm Kitty Runstedler. I'm an employer relations consultant at Conestoga College. I'm also the CEWIL college rep for ITAC and help them to get their message out to all of our members. On the panel today, we will have from ITAC, Jan Hall, Program Manager, Brett Hotas, Program Manager, and Trish Robb, Program Coordinator. But before I turn it over to them, I just wanted to do a couple housekeeping tasks. First off, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CEWIL website in a few days. All participants are muted during the webinar, except for myself and our panelists. Please use the Q&A option on the bottom of the webinar screen to ask any questions of our panelists. And I'll do my best to summarize those questions as they come in and present them to our panel when we get to our section for questions. And we do encourage you to ask lots of questions, and we'd like to have a very open dialogue. And if I miss any questions, please re-prompt or re-ask. If you have any technical issues, we're going to use the chat function, and Mark from our management team is online to assist you. So please, again, use chat for any technical help, and the Q&A option on the bottom of your panel for any questions for our panelists. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Brett Hotas, who will be taking the lead for this ITAC presentation. Over to you, Brett, and I'll let you do further introductions.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to everybody out west. Thank you to CEWIL for hosting this and the entire series, really, and Kitty for hosting and moderating today, and to Mark for overseeing all of the tech. I'll be running us through the webinar today. Jan will be supporting Kitty at moderating any and all of your questions that are coming through in the chat, so please do take advantage of that. And we did want to introduce Trish Robb, who will be joining us next week. We've been very proud to announce that we've expanded the program as of September, and with that growth and scaling comes a need for additional support. So we look forward to introducing you to Trish Robb in the future. Just a very sort of quick agenda here that I'll go through. We did send out a one-pager to everybody that was registered yesterday. Just a very quick overview to bring everybody up to speed so we don't have to spend too much time on those items, but we will review some of the key items from that. We'll talk a little bit about partnership opportunities the ITAC talent is open to engaging in with all post-secondary institutions and CEWIL members. Some more specific updates regarding Career Ready 2.0, so that's the expansion and some of the new and exciting changes. And then again, we put out the one-pager because we really wanted to spend some time engaging in dialogue and questions. So no question is too small or too big. Just please do remember to put it into the chat so that we can address it at the end of the webinar. And if you are joining us at a later date and didn't receive the one-pager, there's a link for it right there, itactalent.ca. Visit our website and you can download it directly, PDF version /CR webinar. And so essentially what the one-pager what covers is just an overview of the funding structure. So of course, quite standard across all of the SWIP partners. So that's 50% of wages are covered up to a maximum of $5,000, or 70% of wages up to a maximum of $7,000 for students from the underrepresented groups that we've identified. And I'll circle back to this a little bit later when we talk about the changes, but it used to be for first-year students that they would qualify for the increased subsidy. Now, there's a little bit of change here, and we've seen so far some great participation in this area, but students are participating in co-op for their first time. So you can let your employer networks know that. Of course, the employer is reimbursed only at the end of the placement period, providing they've provided all of the pertinent documentation. And I'll circle back to this later too, but the student must always be, to meet the, the spirit of our program, that the Cooperative program, the student must be immersed in technology as it relates to their field of study or their career path. And just to dig in a little bit deeper into the one-pager, I just sort of discusses ITAC as a proud, national member-driven nonprofit organization. We've been a collective voice for Canada's ICT industry. We've been around for about, 60 years now. In one way, shape, or form or another. And we currently have about 300 members right across Canada. We became a SWIP partner, the Student Work Placement Program, in 2017 through our ITAC Talent Division. So we're seeking to address the talent gap in Canada's tech sector. We've made over 1,000 placements to date. We had a record-breaking summer, so we're really proud of that, and we're looking forward to introducing Trish to the program as well. Over the last couple of years, we received additional funding for placements in AI and cybersecurity placements, so those are some additional areas of attention and targets that we've been working hard to achieve. And of course, as you all know, we've expanded the program, which we sort of call Career Ready 2.0 in fall of 2019, although I will also remark that it is one and the same program. And of course, we're offering partnership opportunities. We're trying our best to make our way through all of the universities, colleges, and cégeps, polytechnics across Canada, to sort of have a look at, what the needs are of the post-secondary institutions, what are the needs of the employers in the region, what are some challenges or successes that we can, help you celebrate or remedy. Just looking at ways that we can collaborate and work together. So we've sort of made a multitude of different sort of types of commitments and agreements. A lot of MOUs coming through with universities and colleges, different PSIs, which first of all help us to ensure equity is built into our funding. Even with this expansion, we're finding that we're kind of coming close to, or we consistently come close to reaching our funding cap for the placement periods, which is great. I mean, that's, a lot of people are accessing it and we've got the word out, but we want to make sure that that the funding is equitable. And so that essentially means that we're, allocating by region or by PSI, a certain amount of placements to ensure that some of the larger schools aren't necessarily scooping it all up, and some of the smaller schools, and certainly ones in more rural areas, will be able to have access to our program. And we're also trying to find, new and different ways to sort of promote this cultural shift, in the nation. So trying to help employers and encourage them to think a little bit more strategically around, how they can really tap into student talent, what that might look like. And in particular, and this is something that, we want to invite you to join us in and hopefully, formalize it somehow. But, in the summertime, there's really a missed opportunity, I think, for students to have that work integrated learning experience. And so we're trying to put together different initiatives and activities to sort of pivot students away from this idea that we've all sort of grown accustomed to, and I'm sure many of you can relate, but in the summer you go to your McJob, or you work at the convenience store, or at Subway, something like that over the summer. But how about you've got these really great skills after 1 or 2 or 3 years of college, university, and you're doing these McJobs, but you've got some really great skills. And so it'd be really great if you were in, a software engineer or a marketer, and you could, spend the summer, practicing those skills instead of, doing something outside of that realm. So and then, another thing too is just keep in touch if you're not, able to sort of commit to, to a more formalized partnership, that's fine. But do keep us in mind, you know, if there's any events in the region that you'd like us, that you think that we should attend. We'll keep the dialogue open as well. Any ITAC events or initiatives that we've got going on that we think you might be a good fit for, we're happy to include you and just sort of keep that line of communication open. And yeah, we definitely want to invite you to come along on all of our initiatives. So we'll circle back to that at the end. For now, some exciting changes to the Career Ready program. We have a new web-based application portal. If some of your employers applied for funding through us in the past, it's more of a manual process, but we're happy to have introduced this more streamlined process earlier this year. It's really made things a breeze for all stakeholders, students, employers, and for us to manage. And if any of you are curious about how many placements you might have had in any year or placement period, or any students or employers that might have benefited, or the number of students or employers that would have benefited from a wage subsidy, we have enhanced reporting capabilities now too. So we can let you know exactly what the value of our program is to your institution. We're also happy to introduce part-time placements. We're looking for at least a minimum, I would say, of 20 hours per week. So that's new and exciting for employers who might not have the full capacity or be able to financially commit to a full-time placement. So there's that opportunity. We're also very proud and very excited that, that we're now able to include non-for-profit groups or groups operating more in the third sector. Those are some of the folks that might need it the most. And again, to circle back to, you know, some of these, you know, agreements that we'd be working on. I think that nonprofit groups are probably less well versed in accessing wage subsidies or being able to take advantage of co-op students. So this might be a new idea for them, and we're happy to sort of help you sort of cushion that or introduce them into this program. And there's been sort of a pivot in the program as well. So before it was very program focused. You had to come from something very pure STEM. You had to come from computer science or IT, studying something like that. And now we've sort of changed it because there's more of an interdisciplinary focus. And so we're looking at the role. So is the role a great fit for the program? So again, is there a digital component or a technological component to the role that immerses the student in a way that is relevant to, you know, their field of study or their career choice? So we're opening it up to maybe more art students who are studying design work. There's a lot of, you know, CAD stuff happening. There's a lot of UX, user experience or user interface design. That's all very digitized. We're seeing, you know, English students from arts faculties be recruited to work in digital communications. A really cool example is, you know, there was a student from an anthropology department studying linguistics, which was a very classic, you know, department in academia. That's been digitized too. You know, they've been recruited to work for an AI company that was doing some work to use AI to do translation software. So I thought that was very interesting and I wanted to share that. And so, you know, business, the digitization of marketing, for example. So there's all these different possibilities. And I think that what we have to sort of be aware of is that times, you know, are changing. There's technology everywhere now, of course. And, you know, there's more of a focus on, you know, what are the skills? What are the transferable skills? So there's, you know, less of a focus on the program, I think, even in the workforce. So I think now that our program is more role focused, I think that we really reflect what's happening and going on in Canada. So we're very happy about that. And before I move on to the questions, I just wanted to share just one last sort of example, just sort of show you the full potential. And so this was these are some snippets of a job description that came through last week. And so they wanted to combine, you know, Master of Social Work skills and knowledge into developing a training platform for diversity and inclusion related to webinars. And so there'd be, you know, a little bit of UX experience there. They'd even, they'd even be immersed in developing an understanding of AI and matching algorithms when they're building out the platform, and they're really involved and immersed in that. And there would be, part of the social media team by implementing policies and solutions. So you can see how all of this sort of really combines to be this, tech immersion, very interdisciplinary. And I thought that this was sort of the gold standard of something that I just thought was really great. And I really wanted to make sure that I shared it with everybody today. And so that was sort of a crash course of the Career Ready program. Thank you so much. I'm just sort of operating under the assumption that we all sort of have a general pretty good idea of student work placement program standards and procedures. If there is any more information that you need about the program, please do join us on our website, or you're welcome to ask that today. And so I'll open the floor up to Katie and perhaps Jan to introduce any questions that any of you attending today might have.
So Brett, there is one question here, and I think you've sort of answered it, but maybe to clarify it in more detail. So women in STEM, is it limited to STEM, or would an art student qualify? And maybe that would take you back to that question, example you gave about the social work master's candidate. Would they have qualified as a woman in STEM because of the role they're doing, or is it the actual program they're in?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Yeah, unfortunately, so in that example, the student was actually studying an MSW, which I guess would fall under the arts. So unfortunately, that is not a science, technology, engineering, or mathematics program. So no, they would not qualify for the increased subsidy. But what I have found going through the applications that have been coming in is that there have been a lot of women who have been applying who might have been an art student, but I'm noticing that they're still a lot often a first-time co-op placement as well. So I haven't really noted much of a loss in terms of that for the employers. Okay. Excellent question.
Thank you. Are municipal government groups such as the City of Toronto eligible?
Yeah, we're actually able to subsidize placements done with municipalities and hospitals as well. So the exception to that would be provincial bodies, unfortunately. So provincial government bodies would not qualify.
Great. Would you discuss more about what a post-secondary institution agreement would look like?
That's a good question as well. We have a template and we kind of keep it open. Again, for us, the purpose is two things. The first is that we want to build equity into our funding. So we want to make sure that we have a look at what the potential amount of co-op placements are in any given 1 year period with your post-secondary institution. And what we'll do is we'll kind of crunch some numbers and look at what we think, and we'll look at historical placements as well, just to sort of evaluate how many placements we might anticipate you having. And then we kick it up a notch because, we plan to hopefully work with you on at least sort of one project, even if it's just sort of a communications project, to bump that number up a little bit, and use our resources to support that as well. So number one is, allocating and trying to figure out what a good number is for you. And then number two is just to sort of figure out what you as an institution have in terms of resources to commit to working with us and what partnership might look like to you. So maybe you've wanted to do a webinar in collaboration. We're happy to do that and promote that to our network in your region as well. So it can look at a lot of different ways, and we kind of leave it up on a case-by-case basis to see how far it goes, or to see, if there's higher level activities happening. But it's just a good way for us to get to know each other. And I would say a good way to understand exactly what your needs are, and outline a couple ways that we think we can support you in developing the amount of placements in your region.
Thanks, Brett. I just wanted to remind people online. I noticed that a few of you are posting questions in the chat, and we've actually are using the Q&A function rather than chat for the questions. But I will, for those of you that have already typed on chat, I will come back and try and catch those questions as well. So going forward, if you could put all your questions in the Q&A function rather than the chat function, it just gives us one central spot to monitor. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. And I'll just pick up one last item on that last question. If you are interested, and if you just sort of want to bounce some ideas off one another or just explore what that might look like, please do reach out to us, careerready@itac.ca, and we can just set up a meeting and we can talk about what that might look like.
Okay, so do employers need the school signature for release of funding?
That's a good question too.
To further, what is the school's role in that funding approval process?
Right. I think it depends on the post-secondary institution. So generally, there's the university, or we don't really ask a lot of the university, to be honest. We just sort of ask for openness and partnership. So so there's that component. But in terms of from an employer perspective, when they are going through the application process, the only sort of thing that involves the university is we just ask them to list the officer that they're dealing with it, if it is indeed a co-op placement, and the universities that they're working with, just so we have a way to report back to the universities if anything ever comes up. But yeah, the role of the university specifically in the application process, or sorry, the post-secondary institution in the application process, is pretty not really involved. So there would be no work required.
Okay. Is there funding wage subsidy available for international students that are required to obtain a co-op for their program?
Yeah, that's a very good question as well, and somebody already asked me today. Unfortunately, there isn't. We have a very open dialogue with ESDC. We report back to them, every couple months, and along with the other employer partners, and it comes up all the time. Unfortunately, it's just not something that's in the vision for the SWIP program at the moment. ITAC is currently working on sort of a side project or a side initiative that might be able to support employers in different ways who are taking on international students, probably through like learning modules. But unfortunately, that's not something that we're able to commit to or offer at the moment. But that question does come up a lot, and again, we do relay that to the government, so that they're aware that that is a need, and we would agree.
Okay, I'm just reading a couple questions here, and I'm gonna try and combine a couple of these just to further elaborate on the not-for-profit, because there's some questions here now. Would eHealth Ontario qualify? So would a provincial, I guess, government organization, you mentioned already that municipal organizations qualify. So can you elaborate a little bit more about maybe who would be covered under a not-for-profit group? Or maybe wouldn't
Yeah.
be?
I think when we say nonprofit, I think more community-based nonprofit. We can examine things on a more case-by-case basis. We don't like to turn anybody down without sort of really looking at the full picture. So for example, post-secondary institutions, they will not qualify, but we have subsidized one or two where they had companies sort of operating at arm's length. So it sort of depends where the funding is coming from and what the project looks like. So I don't want to turn any of those folks away. And of course, it is a new item that we're introducing in the program. So we're still navigating that as well. So, kind of same thing, keep the dialogue open. If you have an employer who might be interested, or you think that they might benefit and you're not quite sure if they're working too closely with the provincial government, for example, just shoot us an email, include a little bit of information about that organization and maybe a link to their website so we can do a bit of research. But I would say, yeah, in general, community-based nonprofits is sort of meant by that.
Okay, great. And so here's just a more practical example. Would a bachelor in design student working for an architecture organization or design firm be eligible for funding?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this, it's at that point, it really is up to the firm to put together a job description. And this is part of the application process now. We ask for the job description in its sort of complete form, and then we ask for just a little summary. And in the summary, that's when the employer is really asked to demonstrate how the student is really immersed in technology as it relates to their role or some sort of tech or digital process. So, the example that, that I would use is that, I spend a lot of my day personally on Outlook and using Excel and managing, our web-based application platform, which is kind of a database. And my academic background is I have an MBA, so my background is business. I don't know if I would consider myself immersed in technology. So, it really is up to the employer as an architecture firm to go, okay, they're using these digital platforms, integrating this, using that software, and using CAD. So yeah, we kind of put the onus on the employer. And again, this is new, and we're sort of discovering what works and what doesn't work. And there have been some employers that we've actually had to say, unfortunately, this isn't really quite a good fit. And we'll offer, we don't just decline anybody and say, no, sorry, but, we say, here are our remarks, or how we think it could, really fit a little bit better into the spirit of the program. And what we found so far is that it actually adds a lot more value for the employer when they make those, adjustments. And also, if they start looking, again, at some of the skills that are coming out of some of the programs, because there might be some some skills coming out of these programs that they don't have listed on the job description that they haven't fully realized, and so then they're not taking advantage of those as well, right? So, but yeah, that was a good question.
Brett, we have a couple questions around the part-time. So I'm going to just start with the first one. Will the wage subsidy stay the same for part-time placements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's 50% of wages or 70% of wages. So, they might only earn in the regular category, a part-time placement, probably $5,000, we'll say. So then the subsidy would be $2,500.
Right.
Usually if they're doing a full-time placement and, they're being paid a reasonable wage, after working for 4 months, you find that the student has probably earned over 10,000, probably closer to 12,000. And so most of the subsidies that we issue, the employer will have hit the cap. So that's, either 5,000 or 7,000.
Right. And then another question around the part-time. If a student finds 2 part-time jobs, so 2 organizations offering part-time work, maybe 20 hours with Org A, 15 hours with Organization B. Can each organization be eligible for the funding for the same student?
Yeah, that's that hasn't come up yet. I wouldn't see why not. And I think that would be a perfectly great experience for the student. Yeah, we would support that.
Great. Okay. I think I may find more further down, but right now I think we're okay for part-time. Do you have a regional rep in Alberta, Saskatchewan, or BC?
That's a good question as well. So we're more based in the GTA, our talent team. So we don't have a regional rep per se out there, but you know, I'm happy to make a connection with you from out here. We're, you know, the Information Technology Association of Canada, so we do a lot of web-based meetings. So we're happy to engage in that with you. And if you, again, if you have any specific questions pertaining to the region, please just shoot us an email and we'll do our best to help you.
Great. So do employers find out if they're approved for the funding before hiring someone or only after they apply?
That's a good question. So,
Elaborate further on the timelines for that.
right. So in terms of eligibility, you know, we ask, you know, we offer all of the eligibility criteria on a couple of different parts of the site. So it's all there and available. And so an employer can very easily vet themselves and determine whether or not they're eligible. And it really is quite simple. So, you know, are you a registered Canadian business? You know, do you have general liability? Do you have the capacity to hire and train and look after, you know, the student? All those sorts of things. So, you know, they'll check off all those boxes and go, okay, I'm eligible. And then sort of the next piece of it is, you know, is the student eligible? So you do at some point have to figure out, like, because the student in a way is sort of a co-applicant, or your candidacy is sort of riding on whether or not the student is eligible or not. Yeah, you'll have to apply with the student kind of at the same time to determine whether or not you are completely eligible, I would say. And so then we have to vet student, you know, against the student eligibility criteria, which is done aside and privately from the employer. And then we also have to look at the job description as well. So, and then on that note, with the job description, again, you know, with, you know, sometimes interdisciplinary, you might not be quite sure. We're happy again to receive job descriptions from employers or from post-secondary institutions if you want to share them with us. And again, you know, if it, you know, right on it says, you know, software developer or IT specialist or something, you probably can give it a thumbs up. But if it's a little bit more, you know, if you're not sure, if you know that it needs work and are looking for recommendations, please do send it to us. And then, you know, I'll just take it to the next step too. I'm aware that there are some post-secondary institutions who operate a little bit differently from others, and that in a way that they actually won't assign or match or allow you to take one of their co-op students unless you've fully committed to hiring them and, you know, signing a contract and all that. But for some, you know, companies, it's not possible, or maybe they've taken two, but they want a third, but they can't do it without funding, and so it's contingent on them receiving our wage subsidy. You know, we're happy to sort of work on a soft or sort of a pre-qualification. Like we can sort of, you know, just touch base with the student, make sure that they hit all of the eligibility criteria, reassure the employer that they meet all of the eligibility criteria. So then they're really kind of 99% certain that they're going to get it, and they can move forward with that hiring process with that post-secondary institution. And we're kind of working at maybe a way to sort of formalize or make that a little bit more streamlined. We do kind of have a document that we've prepared, but I've actually found that there's a feature on our platform that we're able to integrate to sort of do a pre-qualification process. So you can look out for that in the near future.
That's great. And that kind of lends me to another question here. Is it possible for post-secondary institutions to get a printout of the application process employers go through so we can help our employer partners?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the home or the landing page of the application platform, there's actually a resource where it just lets the employer know exactly what information they're going to need to provide to begin the application. So a lot of it is pretty standard stuff that they'll be able to respond to, like, you know, approximately how many people are at the organization, who are the primary contacts, what's the, you know, the legal name of the company, etc. Some of the more tricky stuff might would probably come after the application is approved, where that's where we start asking for bank information so that we can pay them. But they'll have due time to prepare all of that. Sometimes what I find is actually that they for a subsidy for the employer, we actually do kind of ask a lot of the student. So we do also provide in advance all of the documentation that the student will need in advance, just to kind of give them a heads up. So that being, a resume, an unofficial transcript, just to sort of, to demonstrate that they are registered in school. And we do need to determine that they are either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. So we do ask for proof of those items as well. And then, just some other statistical information that we ask of the students, but I hope that answered that question.
Brett, I'm going to ask you to jump ahead for your slides, because one of our questions was they wanted you to repeat the website or put it on the screen. So I thought maybe if we just go back to that slide or jump ahead. Actually, I was looking, you have follow us on social media. I'm not sure if your website is on that page or not.
Oh, there we are. Yeah. So at the bottom right, you'll see itac.ca. But you might find some better or more pertinent information on itactalent.ca. So just to kind of capture that a little bit, so the Information Technology Association of Canada, sort of the mothership, our organization, we have our talent initiative, and then we have a health initiative, which is really cool too. That's based, I think, mostly out of Vancouver. And people will sort of always ask, oh, there's all these different SWIP partners, and the funding is relatively the same across the board. What's the difference? And so there's different partners. So there's one in mining, there's one in green tech and clean tech. So if somebody comes through from mining, we work really well with the rest of the partners, and so we'll say we're happy to work with you if we think that there's sort of a tech, more sort of IT or tech, more pure element to it. But please be aware that there's this partner, and this is what they're all about, and you might want to actually partner with them. And so that's kind of what I was saying earlier. We're a national membership organization, a member-driven nonprofit. We have over 300 members right across Canada, and so we've got a lot of clout. We've been around. We have lots of activities with government policy and government relations. So if you want to come along with us, definitely, have a look at our website, get to know us a little bit. And, I'm a values-based leader. So I always like to look at, what values an organization has, and what sort of activities and initiatives they've been up to. And, if that aligns with you, or if that aligns with the employer, that's great. We welcome you to come along and hopefully participate in Career Ready program, and follow us on social media.
So another question here, co-op programs have requirements for their programs that include curriculum, site visits, reflective reports, work terms for each place student for the student to successfully pass their co-op semester. How will this work with the requirements you expect to determine successful completion of their semester, or it doesn't?
Oh, okay, yeah, I see. Well, that's great that the universities have their metrics, and as you should. We have our metric as well, and so we use sort of two main components, and we're actually exploring ways that we can develop this. So we require the employer to, after they've been approved within the first couple weeks, sit down with the student, and we have a comprehensive student learning plan, and that's part of the application process. So when you're approved, you then have to commit to completing this. And so we find it's a really good way to have a better supervisory experience, and to have a better menteeship as well, because the student can sit down and say, these are some things that I was really excited about coming here and learning about, and these are my skills. And the employer can go, oh, I didn't know that you have those skills. Let's work on those, or you can apply them in these areas or this project. So it's a good way to sort of, especially in a we work with a lot of SMEs and definitely a lot of businesses that are operating out of incubators. So it's just sort of a good, we maybe don't have, a lot of sort of formalized supervisory experience. So this really sort of helps them, get going on that. So yeah, we review those, and then we also do, we also have student feedback surveys. So that's how we maintain our quality control. We actually haven't really had any negative experiences, we're very pleased to say. We've had maybe 1 or 2 experiences where the employer had to let go of the student just because it wasn't a good fit, and sometimes that happens. We report that back to the university, and depending on the circumstance, we will usually still provide some level of recompense to the employer for having tried to follow through with the commitment. But yeah, that's how that would work.
Thank you. So I had another question just to remind everyone again. These slides, this webinar will be available on the CEWIL website. And usually they'll send a link out on the Sunday newsletter as well with it. But yes, these slides will be available for you. And the second part of the person's question was, is there specific information or a one-pager or multiple pages, a document that they can send to their employers?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. We have a brochure. I'm working hard right now to have it updated, and it may or may not sort of coincide very soon with an updated version of our website. So if you are wanting our brochure, I can certainly send that out to you, and you can request that for the time being at careerready@itac.ca. And I can make a note to send you the updated brochure as well, as it becomes available. And in fact, that's probably something that we would try and distribute to all of the universities eventually anyways. So our post-secondary institutions, pardon me. So yeah, keep in touch.
Perfect. Is there still funding available for winter 2020? What are
That's a
the
good question.
deadlines?
Yeah. The winter application is open. It's available to you online, and there certainly are some spots available. Yes.
And is there a deadline for employers to apply?
Employers should be sure to have their applications in, by the end of January. Sometimes certain employers aren't really aware of it. So if you come across somebody in February, definitely, you can point them in our direction. I'm not saying that it'll be too late. It is possible. We'll just have to see where the funding is at. But we try not to turn anybody away. There's all these, sort of different circumstances and delays. And as I mentioned earlier, we work with a lot of, very small businesses, incubators and stuff. So they're often strapped for time and resources. And, as much as this is of value and a benefit to them, it does take up some time, and sometimes, that's just enough of a barrier. So yeah, in general, yeah, we're happy to work with anybody, even if it's a little bit past, the deadline. But certainly, before or within the January mark would be the best time to not only get your application in, but make sure that you're getting the funding.
So that leads another question here that does come up a lot. Can the student be working for the employer before the employer has applied for funding?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So I'll use an example. So if the student maybe started a summer internship for a few months or part-time over the summer, and then they went into to their co-op mode in September. So now it's the fall placement period. Yeah, depending on how far back, we can look at it again on a case-by-case basis. We don't want to, tell everybody no right off the hop. It sort of depends on the circumstance and just how far back. But usually we're pretty flexible. But again, just on a case-by-case basis. And if they had any questions about that, or if they wanted to know if they would still be considered, or what the timeline is, or how much funding we're sort of forecasting, they're certainly welcome to reach out. Again, probably best practice for that is we'll always do the best that we can. But there's no super strict, deadline.
So if my student starts working in January for their co-op work term, can the employer apply at the end of January and still qualify?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at applications in February, my biggest concern there is that the funding could be starting to run out potentially. So if you're aware of the Career Ready program, we really do encourage you to apply as soon as possible. Even just sort of start the process, right? Just kind of get it in and get the ball rolling. And we do send out sort of, gentle reminders and tips to completing applications, and we're always here available to help. And we'll have Trish as well as an additional resource to support them and coach them through any questions that they might have.
Do positions have to be net new?
Oh, that's a good question as well. Thank you. They do. It was challenging for some employers. And again, the government really does take our feedback seriously. So we reported a number of times that it was actually causing a problem for employers to access the funding. There's some, as we mentioned, employers who are working out of incubators who really can't scale that quickly, right? So every year they can only really ever have 1 or 2 co-op placements, and those are really great experiences for students, but they actually can't have them without the funding. So that's actually -2 placements in the ecosystem. And so what the government has agreed to do is allow 2 different ways to calculate net new. And so one is using your last year as your baseline against your current year and projections. Or instead of using last year's number, you can use 2016 moving into the 2017 government fiscal year as your baseline. And so that the meaning of that year is that's when we were the year leading up to the introduction of the program. So, before the program, how many, and how about now? So usually it tends to work out in favor for, the S in the SMEs. So and again, we've got a pretty straightforward formula to help employers work out the best way to calculate that number. And again, if an employer is calculating that number and they come up with a 0 or a negative number, still get them to reach out to us, because we want to make sure that they sort of fully explain that they can use the year leading up to the introduction of the program as their baseline number. We really don't want to turn anybody away if there's a way to sort of work around things.
What are the guidelines for a recent immigrant?
That's a good question. So as you know, permanent residents are eligible to the program. So a permanent resident will qualify for the increased subsidy if they've been in Canada, if they've arrived or received PR within the last 5 years.
Thank you. If an employer hires more than 1 student, can they apply for each student?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we kind of have a loose rule. So we say within any placement period, okay, so of which there are 3 in every year, we try and limit employers to about 12 placements. That's not to say that we won't end up giving them more than 12 placements per placement period, because that works out to 36 a year. And so you can kind of technically borrow from one or the other. But, if there's, if there's only really a limited number of spots left that we have for funding, and you've applied for 12, and then you're applying for 5 more, we'd sooner give the 5 placements to, 5 different organizations who could really benefit from it, rather than allocating all of those to just to one employer. And again, it's just how we work. We're really interested in building equity into the way that we disperse our funding. So that would be, and then, if for some reason there's a really big project taking off and a company needs 20 or 30 in one particular placement period, again, case by case basis, we want to make sure that that project gets off the ground for the scale up, and that's something that we're happy to work on with employers. So common theme there is we're always sort of interested in the story, and we really want to get to know the employers in our network as well. So
Great. Can you tell us how many spots are approximately available for winter and then for the coming spring term?
that's a good question. I'll say we have enough. We have enough for winter. It's still actually really early in the game. I think that universities or employers start recruiting, and I think that universities, and correct me if I'm wrong, or sorry, post-secondary institutions, will start sort of allowing and beginning the placement process as early as, I want to say, middle of October. So we were pretty good. We were able to open up funding at the end of October for those who were sort of ahead of the game. And sort of what we found is that a lot of employers will actually apply in the month leading up to or during the month of the placement, because they tend to hear about it late. Like, we're still trying to get the word out. So yeah, as it stands now, we're kind of in the early stages. We should have enough to go around. And again, in terms of building equity, into our funding, that's why it could be helpful for you to reach out if we haven't already been in touch to discuss what an MOU might look like between your post-secondary institution and the Career Ready program.
Can a student work remotely with an employer?
That's a really good question as well. So again, we're with the learning plan and all that, we're very concerned with, just making sure that the student has a really good supervisory experience. So yes, we do allow remote placements. However, the employer will have to sort of make an extra commitment to demonstrate how that supervisory experience is going to go. Because there's not really, a hands-on, is there maybe a meetup style meeting happening once a week, a touch base, or again, sort of case by case basis. I would say in general, yeah, we do accept them, but there's just a little bit more of a microscope on that experience.
Can you just give a bit of information around stacking funds? Are employers allowed to access other resources? And is there anything by region you can enlighten us with?
That's a really great question too. Thank you. Yes. So the general rule is, federal funding plus SWIP funding, which is federal and federal. Unfortunately, you would not be able to stack that. There are some provincial sources of funding that an employer definitely could benefit from. Although I will caution, it's really important for the employers not to be over subsidized. So they shouldn't be claiming any more than 100% of the wages that they've paid out. So we have had a couple employers who have reduced the amount that they've claimed with us. And if we are aware that that you are tapping in from another resource, we do ask that you provide the documentation on that as well. And for our friends in Ontario, I'm sure we're all aware of the Ontario Cooperative Education Tax Credit. Hopefully that sticks around for a while. That's a really great additional resource. Some of our employers will be getting, I think, maybe $2,000 or $3,000 additional on their taxes. So that's one opportunity in Ontario. in British, for our friends in British Columbia, if you're aware of Innovate BC, we're kind of engaging in partnership with them as well. So they have sort of a similar wage subsidy program to us as well. So there's some synergy there. Some programs too are only for particular time periods. So I think there's another one through Future New Brunswick that maybe, if I'm correct, I could be wrong, but I feel like it only operates maybe in the summer. But you know, that's sort of a good opportunity for an employer to, because we only fund for one placement period over 4 months. So if you take on a student in January to April, and they're subsidized through ITAC, that's great. And then you go, well, we can't really afford to keep them around. You can sort of spread out that funding and apply for a provincial source over the summer, or maybe Canada Summer Jobs or MyTax, just to kind of keep it going. And so that's a really good value proposition for employers, as well as to have the longevity, because sometimes a 4-month placement is great, but sometimes an 8-month placement is even better depending on the project. So long story short, yes, you can sometimes stack with provincial sources of funding, not federal, however.
Thank you. And just to clarify then, if a student is hired for 8 months for winter and spring, where they have consecutive work terms, can they only be funded for one work term, or can they be funded for both?
Well, there's kind of two things to consider there. So the first is the funding cap. So they can certainly work for 8 months, but I mean, within the first 4 months, they're going to hit that funding cap of 5,000 or 7,000. And then the second is that we can only fund for work that's ever done within the placement period. So, if an employee starts, if a student starts, August 1st, but they're starting a month early for their co-op placement, which would normally start in September. That's work that's done outside of the placement period. So, that's when things start to get a little murky. So we try and keep things, more strictly for the work done that's done within the placement period parameters. And so that's, winter, January 1st to the end of April, summer, May 1st to the end of August, and then, September to December 31st for fall.
Okay, last question, and then we're going to run out of time. If they've never used ITAC funding before for a co-op, is it considered new regardless if they've hired a co-op in the past or if they've accessed funding from another partner? I'm going to add to that question.
Right. So that is a good question. So the first thing is, a student can only ever receive the wage subsidy once per their tenure with an employer. And if they've received our wage subsidy, it means that they've received a student work placement program wage subsidy. So that student would not be eligible under SWIP guidelines with another employer partner. And then there was a second part to that question. Could you just remind me what that is?
Oh, if they've, let me see. So you've never used the ITAC funding before?
Oh, right. Oh yes. So when you're crunching the numbers for the net new, it's not necessarily within the participation of the program. It's students in general. So whether or not you've applied for ITAC or ITAC Career Ready program funding before for a student, it doesn't really matter. We're just looking at the number of student work term placements in general that you've taken on within the time period specified.
That's great. I know there was a few more just kind of clarification on some of your answers from our members, but for the sake of time of wrapping up on time within our hour, I'm going to have to close the webinar at this point. But I'd like to reach out to Brett or Jan and Trish when she's on board and continue this conversation with them, continue to ask these questions. They're all very good. And I think that keeping those conversations going will keep this program strong and vital. And I have to tell you, from working very closely with ITAC, since the inception of this program, they are wonderful partners to work with. So I encourage every one of you to reach out and create that partnership with your own post-secondary institution. And I assure you, you're going to be very pleased with the ITAC team. So Brett, Jan, thank you so much for today. And for everyone participating on the call, I thank you as well for giving us your hour, and do look forward to seeing the webinar online.
Excellent. Thank you again. And yes, please do reach out, careerready@itac.ca. If you have any short questions, reach out. And if you want to have a larger conversation, please reach out. We'll schedule some time to chat soon. Thank you all for your time, and have a great week.